Good evening. Welcome once again to the SCI-Arc Fall Lecture Series. An announcement before I introduce Merrill. On Saturday evening, this Saturday evening, which is December 2nd, we're having the second in the series of jazz concerts, the first of which a month ago. We've planned to have 4 for this year. I took this one off of the wall, and so the tape is sticking to everything. The second concert is going to be performed by Richard Grossman and some of his friends, whom are part of the next series of concerts. Richard has been instrumental in not only producing these series of concerts, but he's also been helping us develop music curriculum here at the school, which I think is important in 2 regards. One has to do with the sort of broadening of the curriculum in the School of Architecture, making it more cross-disciplinary, but also it has to do with the direct links between the creative act, the improvisational act as practiced in music, and that which also is part of the creative process of making of architecture. So that's part of the exploration that will continue in the classes that Richard is teaching here. So everyone is welcome, actually should come to the concert. The last one was, I was told, was really quite extraordinary. So, okay. The matter at hand. Oh, I'm slow. I take things quite literally sometimes. I was going to ask someone else, and it's close to the same time now as it will be then, 8 o'clock. So I've answered both questions, whichever you intended to ask. So you know what I mean. Okay, the work that you're going to see this evening, which is, I don't know how much Merrill is going to show, but I think it's quite a good range of work of different types, and show I think a variety of approaches to making of architecture. I've known. You call Mack your husband? Huh? Occasionally, okay. Her partner, Mack Scogin, I've known for quite some time, and see him periodically running around on juries and things of that sort. Last year, and I've seen the work coming out of the firm, Scogin, Elam, and Bray, based in Georgia. Last year I was on a jury for the National AIA Awards, and which are really a lot of fun to do because there's a lot of debate, especially when they put together a jury that is a full spectrum of all architectural persuasions that are being practiced today. The short of the 4 days of jurying over 2 different periods of a 2-month period was that one project that you'll show tonight was a project that was unanimously chosen without much debate at all, but there was a lot of very stimulated discussion. It's a library project. The title was Clayton County Headquarters Library. And the thing that I guess fascinates me about the project, and it comes clear to me, I think the method of working in their firm, which I think is very similar to what I've seen in the studio that Merrill has been running this semester, in that the work isn't ideological. It's work that comes from people that are interested in building, people that are interested in architecture as a means of exploring, I think, a multiplicity of ideas, and having a method of working I'm being presumptuous perhaps here, but every time I see the images of the library, it makes me think of all of this. That there's a method of working that allows all of these ideas to converge into one place, and these ideas become vehicle for making form. And they somehow cover a full range, all of the aspects of the making of architecture as well as the experiencing of architecture. The work which the library, I think, is exemplary of. It's on the one hand, it's extremely serious, but there's aspects of it that put a smile on my face and make me laugh. It's extremely intelligent, but somehow the intelligence is mediated through intuition. And I think most of all for me, based on what my own interests and sensibilities are, it's extremely well-crafted work. But it's apparently informal, it's not stiff. And what the work ultimately displays is the skill of an architect. And I use the word skill to differentiate an architect from a variety of other disciplines, knowing how difficult it is to get a well-crafted building built. And in the end, it's work that's really about ideas and about building, ultimately testing those ideas through building. I don't know if we need any, yeah, you probably need some of the statistical stuff as well, which I probably should have done first, but it's just, I always get carried away when I see those images, which I have right here. The list is a sort of usual list of being well-educated, having all of the professional affiliations, and having done projects that have been not only well-received publicly, but by the profession itself, and being seriously looked at as a source of ideas, or as we say, a swipe file. She's taught a number of places now, including SCI-Arc, where she's teaching an advanced studio this semester, and hopefully she'll be back again, and of course has lectured extensively. The firm has been in existence, Scogin, Elam, and Bray, since 1984, and the amount of work that they've been doing, I think, seems to be extensive, probably as a result of it all being published as extensively as it has been. And I think, I know to my partner and myself, we tend to look at it very closely for all of the reasons that architects look at other architects' work. So with that, I give you Merrill Elam.
Get all my gear together up here. Thank you, Michael. That was very, very nice. I don't feel like I need to show anything. You've explained it so thoroughly. I want to thank you for inviting me here to this fall. I've really enjoyed this studio, and somehow I'm not sure, after spending all this time with these students who are so inventive and creative, that I feel like I can really tell them much or show them much, but I'm going to try anyway, so here goes. The presentation tonight is more what I like to call a sharing rather than a formal lecture or a formal presentation. It's in two parts, or maybe three parts. The first part is a series of images, things that we say or call in the office favorite things. And then the second part of the presentation is work that we did early on since our inception around 1984. And then the latter part of that second part, which is the third part, will be more current works. I'll try not to talk too much about the older projects and talk to the later projects a little bit in more depth. With that, let's see. I think we can start the, well, let's see. I think I've already did. Did I advance that? If you could go back to 1 on everything, that would be nice. The first series of slides pertain to our past history. Is the, let's see, I'm going to back up and see if I can't get both slides to drop. Okay. Can you set them both on 1 and we'll start at 1? Okay, there we go. We've been architects now for a long while. Just because we've been architects as Scogin and Elam and Bray for 4 years doesn't necessarily let you know what our background was all about. And we spent, the 3 of us, Mack, Lloyd, and I, between 10 and 12 years each. This slide is not advancing. Is there a problem? Okay. At a firm called Heery International, and we started there as junior draftsmen. I think you're going to have to operate this one. Every time I advance the one on the far side, will you advance the one on this side? Okay. Where was I? Oh, we started as junior draftsmen. When we left that firm, Mack was director of design, and he was the president of the A&E company, and it had grown from a firm of about 50 people to around 400 people. But the important thing there was that we started out, we sort of grew up there, and we did projects of all sorts, things as small as children's exhibits in the High Museum of Art, to airports, to racetracks, department stores with green stuff all over them, to children's activities. This was called Skyscraper Caper, and it says something about having your head in the cloud, and which goes on. And we did lots of competitions there and didn't win very many of them. And we noted for a long time that we would be in these meetings with Mack, and he would have his notebook in front of him, and we thought all this time he was taking copious business notes about how to operate a large firm. It turned out that the whole time he was doing these doodles, which you're seeing here on the left. And so those, I think, have been a big influence on Mack's work, or I don't know how exactly that works. This is a little painting that Mack did. And here's a painting and then a rendering that also fall into that same category. The painting related to the doodle, and then the drawing as well. This begins the portion that is sort of about favorite things, and what you see on the right-hand slide is the canopy outside of Circus in Las Vegas. And when we were there, it seemed like sort of one of the saddest evenings of our lives. We went there expecting to be exuberant, but all night long we wandered around and we watched people dropping coins into these metal boxes, and we were sort of overtaken by kind of melancholia. And we thought it was a strange way to spend your money. And then not long afterwards, we were in Rome, and in order to see Michelangelo's wonderful sculpture here, you had to drop a coin into a metal box to turn the lights on. So we decided that that was probably one of the best spent coins in the history of the world. When Mack gives this presentation, he likes to say that this is him in the office and that is the office. He also likes to say that he caught that fish and that it's 30 feet long. Tadalando's studio in Osaka on the left. As we go through here, you'll see several of Francis Bacon images crop up, and there's an interesting story about that. When we were in school, there was a professor by the name of Jim Grady, and we were just freshmen and sophomores, and we had not seen many things of great quality, I suppose. But James Grady owned a Francis Bacon painting, as well as Dali's City of Drawers. And one day in studio, he came walking in with these two brown paper sacks, bags, packages, and he took out of these two brown paper packages this Dali and this Francis Bacon, and and we were sort of overwhelmed at that time about the quality of that work. Not only the technological quality of the work, but also the intuition that goes into it, and eventually all about certain influences about architectural space within those drawings. But mainly, the thing that we remember most fondly in that incident was his ability and willingness to share with us something of such extraordinary value. I like this combination. One thing you'll notice in this series of slides is our images from the vernacular. And I don't want you to sort of misinterpret that as meaning that I'm trying to perpetrate that on you as architecture. But what we like to think about the vernacular is that there's great potential for the making of architecture if one will just look at the vernacular. The slide on the left is just outside Houston, and Brother Dick had managed to assemble a series of trailers there in a beautiful little compound, and he painted them all white, and they were all connected together by electric cords. It was really a wonderful little place. And the fireplace on the left is from a slave quarter down in somewhere in Alabama. And this is Asplin on the right. Strange things on walls. And I'm particularly fond of the little building on the right. There we go. I don't think that's right, but I'm not sure where we are. The slide on the right reminds me of a story. The last time we took a trip to Europe, I looked at the slides that Mack had taken while we were there, and they were all up in the air. And I said, Mack, what did you do while we were in Europe? He said, I decided that I was only going to take pictures of things over my head. This is Poor Girl's Place on the left. I like to talk about this little building on the right. I'm really enamored of it, and I always think that if I could make the sort of good decisions that someone made about that little building, that I would do all right. This is inside Richard Meyer's museum in Atlanta, and this was a young French student who was working with us at the time, and she's having a great reaction to that museum, and that museum will make you feel like that, so when you come to Atlanta, be sure to visit his museum. The slide on the right is not Poor Girl's Place. Villa Julia and somewhere in South Alabama. This is in China, and this is in the South somewhere. The proverbial barbecue pit beside the small country church. I guess these images are important also, and I think Michael touched on this, is you feel like everything you come in contact with is somehow part of your making of architecture, of your becoming an architect. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry, let me get back on target here. Okay. There we go. I wanted you to get those two together. The slide on the right is at a truck stop in Monteagle, Tennessee, and it's one of my favorite slides. It was sort of a mistake, a reflection of a reflection, and it's all about a sort of subculture within a larger culture. Something if you're not part of it, it's hard to really understand it. Now, if you would switch the carousels, we'll begin with the projects. They both set on one now? I think so. This project was for WQXI radio station. It was one of the first commissions that we received when we began our little practice 4 years ago, and well, 5 years ago now. And WQXI radio was the radio station after which the television program WKRP Cincinnati was, on which WKRP Cincinnati was based. And our sort of task and assignment as architects was to try to capture the energy and the exuberance of this radio station. And if you look at the plans at some time at your leisure, you'll see that it's all about collisions and crashes and cross-ups and trying to get people to get together in architectural means. Another little thing I always like to say about this job is that on this corner piece, the two disc jockey booths were made in sort of the shape of megaphones, and one of them was concave and one of them is convex, and it has to do with puffing and blowing. This project is a tiny bridge, and what the client asked us for was a piece of jewelry. Am I doing that? Very good. They asked us to make a piece of jewelry on the landscape, and it was they had developed this very large complex there in Atlanta on the perimeter, close to a place called Perimeter Center, which is an interesting name. And what we eventually ended up doing was creating this very small bridge, and we like to say it's a bridge about bridgeness. Our references were big bridges of enormous scale, as well as water bugs and all sorts of other devices that we were familiar with about spanning bodies of water and other sort of gaps in the earth. It was interesting, I was talking to David Alford earlier, and he said that one of his best criticisms had come from Bill, who is your maintenance guru here. Well, when we were doing this little bridge, as we were building the model, the building maintenance guru in our building came through, and he looked at the model and he said, "You know, you need something tall right there in the center." So we got a very good critique. This project is the High Museum at Georgia Pacific Center, and it's a satellite museum to the High Museum, which Richard Meyer did, which I referred to earlier. This project was a gift from Georgia Pacific to the city of Atlanta and to Fulton County and to the High Museum. And they gave this space to the High Museum, and the space was already in place. It's a greenhouse space about 125 feet long and 120 feet long, maybe 60 feet high, and only about 20 feet wide. And it is a greenhouse facing south. So we like to talk about this project in terms of it being the making of architecture within a series of difficult and situations, and that somehow out of all that rather clean and nice job managed to emerge. And I think it points to the fact that sometimes the degree of difficulty of a project can, in fact, be that thing that is most important to the project and can really force you to maybe go beyond what you normally would do. We talk about this project as having all of the sort of normal architectural considerations of arrival and enclosure and thank you. I'm not in control up here. Actually, it's kind of fun. It may be discombobulating also. Well, I've forgotten what I was saying. Oh, we were talking about how the project was about standard building parts, facade, entry, arrival, space, all of those ideas that make up our world of architecture. And I'm sorry, people. The craftsmanship on the High Museum, which we just went through, was extraordinary to us. I know you hear now that people don't want to be bothered with doing things well, and that's not true at all. This group of craftsmen came down from Chicago and did all the woodwork in there, and they were thrilled to have the opportunity to do something of that quality, and we were thrilled to have them do it. This is the context, this next series of slides is the context for the Clayton County headquarters library, which Michael referred to earlier. And it's in a little place called Jonesboro, Georgia, which is in Clayton County. And Clayton County is, and Jonesboro is the mythical home of Gone with the Wind. It's the place where Margaret Mitchell spent her summers. And so they like to think about this place as being very, well, I think they have a lot of daydreams about this place. But it is a very fast-growing, small town, and on top of being Tararized, it's also been commercialized and has this wonderful kind of strip that's very active and sort of hand-painted and hometown still. And I always like to talk about that they have a peculiar way of seeing things in Jonesboro, that if you live in Jonesboro and sit on your front porch, that's how you'll see your neighbor's house across the street, because the railroad goes right through the middle of town. Now that may have something to do with the kind of libraries that they are willing to build in their community. You might also think that this was a strange place to have a fairly sophisticated client, but what happens in Jonesboro, Georgia is that it's the stopping place and the hometown for lots of airlines, industry people, and the chairman of the Board of Trustees here was an ex-pilot, and he had almost died at one point in his career in a crash, so risk-taking for him was on an entirely different level than it might be for some other clients that we've all worked with. But there's a kind of order to this library. As you're looking at the slides and as you begin to make observations about it, you'll note that the roof system goes from low to high, and that has something to do with the children's section being under the lowest roof and the adult general collection being under the tallest roof. And if you were to take a little time with the plan, you would understand that there's a kind of axial relationship between important moves in the plan, such as that gray piece that you saw sticking out, which is the genealogy collection, and then on the far end of it, the director's office and its intersection with the circulation desk there, which is under what we call the roof box and the chandelier. And here you see the sort of architectural reinforcement of that axial relationship. And this is looking to and from the genealogy room. I will say one thing about this building, that all of the parts that were used here are very standard parts. The walls are gypboard, and the structure is steel structure with these long span trusses. And if you drive around Atlanta, you're apt to see apartment complexes and other sort of low budget projects being built with these trusses. The budget for this building was like $68 a square foot, which is not very much, even in Jonesboro. And we were very lucky because outside the reading room is a piece of property which is a floodplain for a creek, and which will always stay wooded. So we oriented the reading room in that direction. Faces east, and in the morning, very nice light comes through this oculus, or this round window, and enters into the building. And then in the afternoon, the light reflects off the trees and sort of gives a glow into that room. It's very pleasant. And the three little box cars are the quiet rooms. And if you drive around Clayton County, you'll find that those are very similar to the little things that you see people have ordered for their backyards from Sears and Roebuck's catalog, little tube things. And usually by this time, someone in the audience has said, "How did you get that black stuff on the building? And what is it?" And this is what it is. When we were meeting with the client, there was only one decent thing in her office, and it was this row of boxes which were wrapped in this. And eventually, after, I guess, having those boxes imprinted on our minds over time, we came to the conclusion that it was a nice way to begin to think about the skin, an inexpensive skin for an inexpensive project which needed a special personality. And when I say it was the nicest thing in her office, she had sort of Army issue metal desk and shag carpet and bare fluorescent bulbs. So it was, you can understand why we were attracted to the boxes with this wonderful paper on them. This project is a small project for the Herman Miller Company. What you're seeing in that slide is about 1 million square feet of warehouse and distribution and office space in Zeeland, Michigan. The project we were asked to undertake is that little tiny black dot at the lower end of that long spine. And we were asked to make a entry pavilion, and we were thrilled to be invited there to do this for lots of reasons. Some of those reasons being that George Nelson and Quincy Jones and other people of that caliber had done this very nice, well-behaved architecture at their main site. And here you see early sketches of our attempt to try to make a very small building have some presence on this flat Michigan plain against these very ordered, as I said, well-mannered buildings. And I like to think about this little pavilion as just a little sort of hand that holds you ever so slightly as you arrive at this place. It holds you for just a moment, and then it sends you on down the spine to the 1,000,000 square feet of industrial building. This is our only high-rise project to date. This was to be built in Tallahassee, Florida. It will not be built. But this little building is all about the energy of the automobile and the movement of the automobile within the building. The owner had a very, very narrow site in order to accommodate the automobile to park it, we were forced to get air rights over the alleyway. And what that meant was that the ramp in which the automobile would maneuver through the first 7 floors of the parking deck of the building, which were parking deck, protruded from the building and began to make this sort of sculptural effect on the side of the building, and we simply said, that's a good idea, let's play with it, and it then began to inform the other parts of the building. And we call that upper portion a bay window. The client didn't buy that at all. He knew that wasn't a bay window. Then these are studies for the skin of that building, and we thought of it as sort of like a wet T-shirt, where you would pull this very taut skin over the forms of that building. And this was the last little model we did before the project was abandoned. And you begin to see how the pattern, actually, I guess it's like a wet plaid flannel shirt maybe, which I've never heard of before. This is a one-room project. It's a tiny gallery for the Bureau of Cultural Affairs in Atlanta, and it had been their dream for quite some time to make a gallery space for young and emerging artists in Atlanta. They came to us, and we were delighted to work with them on it. And the room is divided more or less into gallery space and entry space, and this sort of tent-like piece that you see over the entry there was, in our minds, a reflection of and of the temporariness of this installation, knowing that it would not be there more than about 5 years. We sort of threw this tent-like, inverted tent-like piece up against the ceiling. I do know what's happening now. This time I know what's happening. They're changing carousels. This project is for Emory University in Atlanta. It's for the School of Theology there. And we were asked to renovate a housing project and to build a conference or community center that included a small chapel. And in the slide on the right, you can see the pre-existing apartment buildings on the lower part of the slide, and then the conference center, which is the more articulated shape, sort of halfway back of the site, and then some future dormitories and other buildings at the top of the slide. Those will be in the works later on. This is what we were presented with, these little apartment buildings. And we were asked to not to do anything very radical to them in terms of structurally changing them, but to try to give them a new image. So we did lots of cosmetic things to these buildings. We took their roofs up, and we proposed putting on new brick and changing the windows about a bit. but it was all largely cosmetic. We tried to do a few simple things like add canopies and a little sliver of marble and a little special little doorbell on each unit. This is the new construction, the studies for the new construction. On the right is the little chapel that I was referring to, and on the left is the Conference Community Center. And here you see, if you can see the slide on the left, once again you see the site plan, and you begin to understand, I think, if you can read it, the relationship of these roofs that we added to the chapel. The chapel actually became the literal center, literal and as well as symbolic center for the entire site. And here you begin to get the relationship of the chapel to the the conference center. And the little chapel is on the lowest point of the site, so that's one of the reasons that you see it going up so high. We're hopeful that the cross on the top of the chapel will be read from the road at the front of the project. And just this week, they were putting up the trusses for that little chapel. And here you see the study model for that chapel. It holds only 10 or 12 people normally, but its situation on the site is such that it can open up. These doors under these canopies can open up, and people can sit on the lawn outside and on the deck of the conference center, and it will accommodate, 200 people then, and you can give a presentation from the entranceway to the chapel. One thing I like to mention on this model is that this is a study model, as is this model, are all the other models that you see here. So if they appear to you to be a little bit crude and slapped together, in a lot of cases they are a little bit crude and slapped together because they've been cut on and chopped on and studied over time. The collection of slides that I'm showing you here were taken within the last couple of weeks, and you begin to see the form of the conference center and its movement as it, this curving form and the movement of it as it comes around. And then this concrete piece that you see on the left-hand side is the location of the chapel. So that places the chapel in relationship to the conference center. This is the front side facing the housing. And you can see from these slides that we're getting beautiful brickwork on this project. The slide on the right shows you the entranceway into the community center, and you see that sort of skylight lighted space. That's the space through which you move to go to and from the chapel. And on the right-hand side, you're at the top of that ramp that moves through that skylit, what we call a light wedge, and which in our mind is sort of a reinterpretation of the aisle of a church or a cathedral. And you go through it, and then you curve down, you go toward the woods, and then you eventually get to the chapel, and you can see the red trusses going up on the right-hand slide there, and that was just taken the day before yesterday. I was so excited about seeing those trusses up, I had to run out there and take these pictures. They may not be very impressive to you, but we were delighted to see those trusses go up. This is the context for the Buckhead Library for Atlanta, Fulton County. And Buckhead is a little community within the city limits of Atlanta, just north of downtown Atlanta. And when we started this project, or in the course of this project, the Buckhead community got very excited about what we were going to do at this place. what kind of building we were going to make, and they were enormously concerned that we would maintain the village character of Buckhead. And we went out to find out what the village character of Buckhead was. And we found it extremely interesting. We found cluster mansions. And mansions in the sky, and mansions on the hill. I hope you're getting the idea that it was a problem, identifying the village atmosphere. Aside from that, the site for the Buckhead Library is a wonderful opportunity, or was, I hope still is, now that we've placed a building on it. It's on a ridge which overlooks in the southerly direction downtown Atlanta, and this is the view that you get both during the day and at night from the high point on that site. And what you see here is the configuration of the site, the northern part of the site being the top of the T, and the southern part of the site dropping off down the hill. And what we were faced with was putting this building on this very strange shaped site. Our solution, or I'm not sure you can call architecture a solution, our conclusion, our proposal for the building was this sort of linear configuration, which brought you in at the upper part of the site and then took you directly on axis through to the southern part of the building and opened up that view. And in section, you see there that it works like maybe being on the inside of a camera, a box camera or something. And the scale of the building then changes radically from the north end, where it's only one story, to the back end where it becomes much larger. And our challenge on the front end of the building was to gather people from the sidewalk where they would be walking, as well as parking areas on both sides of the front part of the building, bring them in from all three directions to a single point, and make one front doorway there. And here you see our attempt to sort of reach out in those directions and gather people in. Also, we considered this front piece as a kind of locking device between the body of the building and the sidewalk and then the street. In the course of this project, the client was able to find additional funds, and we were able to come up with a skin for the building other than metal siding. And what you're seeing here is, once again, construction sites. The building's still under construction. But what you're seeing is a slate tile, which is just simply hammered, nailed into place over plywood and building felt. And they are slightly larger than what you would see on a normal slate roof. You probably don't see too many slate roofs in California, but we see a good many of them on the East Coast. And then you see on the left here the sunscreens on the southern part of the site. Southern part of the building on the big window. And this was a few weeks ago, and the canopy had not been painted. And the sidewalk is not checkerboard, that's wet concrete. So it's a monolithic sort of... Will the one on the right focus a little bit? I don't know, maybe just... You see a more complete version of the front canopy there. And this little glass piece that is coming toward you there is the manager's office, and she's sort of queen of Buckhead in that location. And here we are under the cone, which is is on axis with the front door. And on the right, you see the southern window, how it's revealed to you even from the very, very start. And again, this is a relatively inexpensive building and very sort of standard building materials. And I couldn't resist this. I ran by just the other night, Sunday night, I guess it was, and they had the lights on for the first time, so I brought you these night shots. I had not seen it myself, and so it's interesting to see that it's fairly dramatic at night. And these are detailed shots of the canopy out front and slate as it appears in amateur. This project you may have seen published. This is our most recently completed project, and it's a showroom for a Herman Miller furniture company in Atlanta. And the program for this project included several parts. One was what they called their sort of gallery space, where they display their furniture in a gallery atmosphere, and then offices for their salespeople and regional managers, and then the front part of the project, which was the entry part, which was very important to them. And what they said to us about that was they wanted people to come in from this very sort of ordinary parking lot into this sort of not very distinguished developer's building and come into an environment that would make them forget where they had been and would cause them to become cause them to sort of become involved with architecture in a friendly sort of way, something that would sort of nurture their being there. And what you see here is the series of rooms, the entryway, and then the series of rooms that that feed off of that entryway. The little room that you see on the right, well, but these are both in the same room. The slide on the left is with what we call wall doors open, and it's the same room on the right with the wall doors closed. And we've used those wall doors sort of throughout the project to give it a sense of openness when it was required for large groups, and a sense of privacy and smaller spaces when that's required. Mack likes to think he's very smart, that he planned that magic window on the right, but he didn't. He was as surprised as the rest of us the day he went out there and found that the slanted glass and the projection screen reflected the lights in the ceiling. He thought he was so brilliant. He would hate me for telling you that he didn't know that that was going to happen. Here again, the people who built this project were very excited about having an opportunity to do a really quality job. And I should mention, I suppose, that we spend a lot of time at the job sites when they're in Atlanta, which is what we've had since we've been in business these 5 years. They've been in Atlanta, and that's been a nice treat for us, because over the years at Heery, most of our projects were all over the country. and we very rarely got to visit the construction as it was underway. So Mack delights in going and working out a detail with the builder. I might say that Lloyd does the same. This little project is for the same client as the Clayton County Headquarters Library, and we've just begun design work on it, and it's about a third the size of the other library. And we were given a very difficult site, a shopping center on one side, tract housing on another, many warehouses on another, and a horse pasture on the other. So we decided that this little building should have a sort of internal logic of its own, that it should be sort of like a mushroom in the landscape, self-contained and all of its, and unto itself. And what you see here is a little model that one of the young people in our office put together so that we could begin to study the roof structures. And he pierced the base here with these little sticks. He just cut away the Coca-Cola cardboard box and put the sticks through, and we played with the roofs, and we took the roofs to the client, to the meeting, this little model with removable roofs, and they said, oh, can our roofs move? We said, no, we don't think so. And here you see a bit further study on the roofs and the center core, and the plan which conforms to the property line along the street and its geometry. And here is a little later model where we're beginning to understand how to put this thing together. And here we're taking the model back apart again to try to understand even further how to put this thing together. And this is a study for that little tower piece. And we are going to place all of the mechanical equipment and so on around this tower, and it will be like the trunk of a tree or the stem of a mushroom, literally. This is the last project which I'm going to show you tonight. This is the first house that we've ever designed, and it's for this young couple on the left, and their names are Todd and Linda Schmar. And they're both attorneys, and they're both very bright, and they have varied interests. They are potters and printmakers, and they also are believers in an Eastern form of, it's a religion, I suppose. So they gave us plenty of stuff to work with in terms of the personality of this project. The other very exciting thing about this project is that they acquired a piece of property just outside of downtown Atlanta, maybe 4 miles from downtown Atlanta, which is borders on a place called Fernbank Forest, which is a science center with a virgin forest. So when this house is built, it will be as if it's in the mountains somewhere in North Georgia. They had a concern for placing the building, the house, on the site. They wanted to save as many trees as possible. They talked about the house that they were in, the basement of that house being dug into the earth, and what a sort of cruel thing that was to do. And we thought that was very observant. And so this little house wants to be sort of one with nature, and at the same time it wants to be shelter and enclosure. So there's this kind of duality of ideas that come to play about it. What you see here are a series of walls that hold the house up off the earth ever so slightly, and allow the earth form to continue off the saddle of this little hill. The house doesn't really want to be there in the trees at all. It wants to be one with the trees, and it's very narrow, 18 to 20 feet wide in most places. And we talk about it being like two single-wide trailers stacked at right angles. Here you begin to see the elevation studies for the two pieces. We think there's a strong relationship here between the walls and the implication of those walls into the exterior, into the woods, that you'll sense some sort of strong relationship there. In closing the lecture, presentation, whatever you want to call this, I'd like to read two things to you. One is a little piece that we were asked to write about ourselves, and we thought that it was going to be published. I don't think it will be, but we took the time to write it, so I want to share it with you. And then the second thing I want to read is a little piece from John Cage's book, Silence. The first part is the piece that we wrote. Architecture is inextricably lodged between the phenomenal and the deductive. Our engagement with architecture involves more than the manipulation of a motif or of limited moves within an a priori process. It entangles three intensive pursuits: the physical, hard work, dedication, discipline, time, stamina; the intellectual, learning, reasoning, knowledge, perception; and the intuitive, instinct, apprehension, and insight. Our physical and intellectual pursuits are strict, disciplined, difficult acts. Our intuitive pursuits move from the realm of exactness toward an intuitive rightness. It is the search for intuitive rightness that holds our greatest fascination. The acute awareness of this almost inexplicable, instinctive, ironic consciousness has most clarified our intent and methods in architecture. Now, the second part is from John Cage in Silence. A young man in Japan arranged his circumstances so that he was able to travel to a distant island to study Zen with a certain master for a 3-year period. At the end of the 3 years, feeling no sense of accomplishment, he presented himself to the master and announced his departure. The master said, "You've been here 3 years. Why don't you stay 3 months more?" The student agreed, but at the end of 3 months, he still felt that he had made no advance. When he told the master again that he was leaving, the master said, "Look now, you've been here 3 years and 3 months. Stay 3 weeks longer." The student did, but with no success. When he told the master that absolutely nothing had happened, the master said, "You've been here 3 years, 3 months, and 3 weeks. Stay 3 more days. And if, at the end of that time, you have not attained enlightenment, commit suicide." Toward the end of the second day, the student was enlightened. I'll be happy to answer, I'll be happy to reply to any questions if there are any. No? None of the what? The question was, do we detail in everything in each of our projects that some of the joints seem irregular and so on? We do and we don't. It depends a great deal on the project. For example, in Clayton County Library, like that siding system, for example, came with a whole series of details. And when you're working with a system like that, what you may want to do is interfere with the standard detail in some way and try to elevate it a bit and make it a bit special. In another case, say the Pine Museum at Georgia Pacific Center, you're right, we detailed every detail, and then lots of times detail them again and again if they don't work out at the site, or if there's some change in the process or whatever. But yeah, the answer is yes and no, depending on the project. I can't see it. Okay, thank you.